What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Sean Noriega here, head coach at NORi Powerlifting, and today I'm very excited to bring you another informative video. I know it's been quite a while since I've made one of these, but do not worry, I am particularly inspired to be getting these out to you guys on a regular schedule, and who else to thank for that inspiration than Johnny Candido. Very good friend of mine. Johnny and I talk pretty frequently about powerlifting, coaching, and just the direction we want to see the sport head in general. And we toss back and forth a ton of creative ideas, and chances are, if you are watching this, you have seen Johnny's most recent video, How to Coach Yourself for Powerlifting. Now, if you are watching this, chances are you have seen it, but if you have not, I think the video is probably one of the most valuable pieces of powerlifting information on YouTube, period. If you don't coach yourself, that's okay. I think there's a lot of information you can derive from it, even if you're an athlete working with a coach. And if you are a coach, I think there's a lot of valuable information you can derive from that video to be a better coach. That's just my opinion. I think that there's a lot that he encompasses in that video that is not really commonly spoken about. And I think that is where a lot of the value comes from in Johnny's videos. I think that he speaks a lot about very creative, novel ideas, and just things that aren't really spoken about. You know, they're not the general kind of Reddit powerlifter topics. And that's kind of what I've strived for this channel to be. I really want to put out new information, creative stuff, and just ultimately give you guys tools and insight to be better powerlifters, coaches, thinkers, doers, right? Enough of that deep stuff. I want to get into the 10 factors that you should consider when looking for or hiring a coach. Now, some of these may be apparent to you. They may have been expressed by some big figure in powerlifting or fitness on YouTube or on social media before. However, there are some topics that I want to discuss that I think are not discussed or even actively discouraged or ignored. Before we get into that, I would like to do a little shameless plug here. The 3D NORi tee will be available on teamnori.com in the shop, which will be launching on 10/31, otherwise known as Halloween. And the launch time will be released in the coming weeks, so please be on the lookout for that. But without further ado, let's get into the 10 factors that you should consider when looking for or trying to hire a goddamn powerlifting coach.
Daddy, chill.
All right, guys, so jumping right into it in no particular order. Number one, we'll start off with education. Now, when I say education, I don't necessarily mean that your coach needs to have had a formal background at undergraduate or graduate degree in exercise physiology or kinesiology or anything like that. I do think that if the patterns line up and this coach seems really passionate, they went into one of those fields because they were genuinely interested in it, they have their certs, they're just invested in this field, I think that's a great positive. However, I think that if your coach is kind of resting their laurels on the fact that they have this degree and that is their only source of enrichment or education alone, I think that they're going to be severely limited. I think that the undergraduate system in America is kind of flawed, and I think that in the exercise physiology and kinesiology realms, they're a bit outdated and frankly not practical for powerlifting. So when I say education, what do I mean? Well, when I say education, it should be a coach who potentially has certifications, though they're not the end-all be-all, but a coach who has just done a lot of independent research, a coach who knows his anatomy, who knows biomechanics, understands the big lifts from a scientific perspective, understands the fundamentals of volume, intensity, frequency, progression, just somebody who has done their due diligence to stay up to date on what strength training and powerlifting training is today, as well as keeping up on the current literature. And I think that you can gather that kind of information from a coach just by simply asking them, you know, what is your educational background in regards to this sport? What kind of information do you read? What books have you read? What podcasts have you listened to? YouTube videos have you watched? Who do you follow on social media? That, to me, in the modern era, especially for powerlifting coaching, is going to be what comprises somebody's education. The fact of the matter is, most of the best powerlifting coaches right now are not people who studied this stuff in undergraduate. They just didn't. They're people who are very passionate about lifting, maybe could not figure out what they wanted to do in their undergraduate. Maybe they could. Who knows? Maybe they work another job. But ultimately, a lot of this learning just kind of takes place in the field. You know, you get really interested, you go on forums, you read, you research, maybe you get some certifications, and then just a lot of it comes from trial and error. Like, a lot of these coaches have evolved over the years and have developed their methods just through trial and error. So these kinds of questions you can ask your potential coach and understand what kind of level of education they've had in the sport. But I don't think that the end-all be-all is any sort of degree, whether it's bachelor's or master's. Again, I think if all the patterns line up and it's clear like this guy is all in on this particular field, then that's a plus. But I think that a lot of the education that we're talking about when it comes to powerlifting is really practical application and learning from like the trenches of powerlifting.
Why you get to Carnegie Hall, don't you? Practice.
The second factor that we're going to talk about is experience. It is really important to ask the right questions to your potential coach when you're trying to inquire. And I think that's going to be a central theme of this video, is to just ask the person the right questions. Now, when it comes to experience, you want to know how the person got into coaching powerlifting, how long they've been coaching powerlifting, how many athletes they've worked with. Get an understanding of what this person's journey has been like as a coach in the sport. You know, who have they worked with? How many people have they worked with? And I think one question that's really important that a lot of people don't necessarily think about is, what is your retention and attrition rate like? As a coach, I think that it's important to almost have this kind of ego where you want your retention rate to be really, really high. Clearly, it's a sign that your athletes are invested in you. They're clearly satisfied with your work. And when an athlete does leave or you stop working with an athlete, you wish the best for them. It should almost make you mad in the sense that you want to do better with the next athlete who comes along or any of your current athletes to make sure that you can retain them and not go through the same thing. And I think it's really important to see that that passion is there with the potential coach, that they want to keep athletes on their team. Because if you ask a coach how many athletes they've worked with and they rattle off some crazy number to you, but you've seen different faces run under their names over the years, it's like, hold up, wait a second, what's going on? Why are so many people leaving this coach? So I think while it's important to know how many athletes a coach has worked with, and obviously if their number is high, they probably have more experience with a varied pool of lifters, I think it's also important to know how many people are staying. So to go along with experience, I think that it's also important to know, how diverse of a population has the coach worked with. Now, with powerlifting, you're going to deal with lifters of all different experience levels, all different genetic potentials, and different priorities, right? So when it comes from to a compatibility standpoint in working with a coach, you want to know that a coach has worked with somebody like you. Because I think that lends itself to much better odds of him having a successful partnership with you, right? If a coach is unfamiliar with your body type, your genetics, your priorities, if the coach obviously a coach has to learn the athlete, you know what I'm saying? But if a coach has had somebody similar to you before, I think that they're going to do a better job, catch on quicker, and things are just going to run a lot more smoothly. So experience, that's number 2, really, really important, but you guys could have guessed that. But the attrition rate, bet some of you weren't thinking about that, huh?
Babe! Babe, wait! Babe, no! Babe, no! Babe, no! Babe! 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 No, babe!
All right, so moving on to numbers 3 and 4, and I'm actually going to group these two together because I think that they both come down to you determining how high level of a lifter you are and how genetically gifted you are. And the questions that you're going to end up asking this coach are, who is the best or most genetically gifted athlete they have worked with, and how have they progressed under them? And conversely, who is the worst or least genetically gifted athlete they have worked with, and how have they progressed under them? And I think the answers to these questions, as well as the answer to your self-evaluation, will determine who is a good fit for you as a coach. Now, let's take the scenario in which you are a very genetically gifted lifter. You are elite and have the potential to rank amongst the best powerlifters in your weight class. You want to find a coach who has worked with high-level athletes at the national and international level. And while this may seem obvious to most people watching this, I think that people are not willing to go out and say the opposite, which is that I do not believe that a coach who has not worked with high-level athletes has the potential to coach you to the best of their abilities in the same way that somebody who has worked with high-level athletes could, even if their fundamental understanding of programming is comparable. And I think that there are some reasons for which this is true. The first reason is that there just is not the same impetus to get an athlete to perform when you are only working with middle-of-the-pack powerlifters versus working with athletes who are truly at the top and their placing actually matters. Now, the reason I say this is simply there isn't as much at stake. And when you're working with middle-of-the-pack lifters, chances are if they are middle-of-the-pack genetically, their rate of progress is not going to be as high as some high-level lifters. And I think that that often gets conflated with stagnation that could be a result of programming. Now, there are athletes who are going to not make much progress within a couple months or even years, and sometimes coaches will attribute that just to genetics. And I think that when you only have exposure to athletes who are middle-of-the-pack, you might make that mistake too many times in assuming that an athlete just can't make progress at a certain rate, when in reality, you can't accept that when you are working with a high-level athlete. And realistically, if you are doing your job correctly, a high-level athlete should be progressing faster. So when you're working with a high-level athlete and they are not making progress, you have to be resourceful and just utterly relentless in making sure that they are able to add kilos to the bar, because their placing and position in this sport depends on it. And it's not the same. It is just not the same for athletes who fall in the middle of the pack. Now, I think that there are also other mental aspects of coaching that you learn when you're working with high-level athletes that someone who never has just wouldn't have experience with. And one of them is the control over a high-level athlete in terms of holding them to the same standards that you would hold other high-level athletes to. I think that when you haven't had experience working with athletes who are at the highest level, your confidence just will not be the same. I think that you need to have an extreme level of conviction in your decisions to work with high-level athletes. And I think that that is something that is learned much more intensely in working with those high-level athletes. And I could totally see a coach who is mismatched have difficulty in asserting themselves with this high-level athlete when trying to impose something that they believe will work. Now, from the strategy side of things, there are simply things on a meet day level that you just would not know because you've never been in that situation with a high-level athlete before. There are coaches who would not know how to take attempts strategically on third deadlifts, for example, or how to chip, or just do all these little things right because there really just isn't the impetus to do so for many people. Now, if we go to the other side of the coin and we talk about whether or not you are a middle of the pack or maybe lower level athlete, and you're approaching a coach who has only worked with superstars, you could run into a ton of dilemmas here that are completely different from the dilemmas you would run into being the genetically gifted athlete looking for a coach who maybe hasn't worked with people who are like you. So if you are maybe middle of the pack or lower, and you're reaching out to a coach who has only worked with high-level athletes, and they don't have a good answer for you on who the worst or least genetically gifted they've worked with, that is a red flag. Because I think that a coach can be very well evaluated on their ability to coach people by how good they were at taking an athlete who maybe wasn't that gifted and getting them to progress or getting them to a level at which they are respectable. Right? I think that athletes can probably progress faster than most people give credit to. I think that it's become pretty popular amongst coaches and just amongst athletes to think that like a lack of progress is normal, and it's not. You're probably doing something wrong unless your training age is super high or you're super advanced. So if you have a coach who gives you a good answer on this, that they've actually been able to develop athletes like you who maybe haven't been dealt the best hand in terms of strength to a respectable level, then that's important. That's good information, and that would be a sign that this could be a potential fit for you. But if a coach has only worked with high-level athletes or only prioritizes high-level athletes, their programming could be mediocre, and these athletes are actually succeeding in spite of that. And they might not be the best option for you because you just might require more attention to actually see a considerable rate of progress for yourself. Right? Because there are high-level athletes who are going to progress in spite of mediocre programming. It happens in all sports where athletes have subpar training methods, but they've just been dealt a great hand genetically and succeed because relative to other people, they are just better. So these are two questions that you are absolutely going to want to ask your potential coach when trying to determine whether or not they are a good fit for you.
But I'm a genetic freak, and I'm not normal. So you got a 25% at best at beating me.
So on to number 5, and this is probably rounding out the more obvious factors to consider when hiring a coach. And I think this goes both ways in the sense that an athlete should always inquire this information from their coach, and a coach should always inquire this information from their athletes, which is getting all of the compatibility questions out of the way first. Because the last thing you want is to sign on with a coach or an athlete and you end up having a mismatch of priorities, a mismatch of expectations, and there ends up just being this personality clash that leads to problems down the road and make things not work out. So what you want to find out are, what are these coaches' priorities? What are their expectations of their athletes? And what types of athletes do they like working with? Because there truly are coaches out there who enjoy working with a very diverse group of athletes in terms of what their priorities are. There are coaches out there who work with really high-level athletes, but they enjoy just as much working with the athletes who have a family, who have a job, who don't necessarily put powerlifting at the top of their priorities. They enjoy just being a part of people's journeys. But there are also coaches out there who only like working with the elite level lifters, people who eat, sleep, and breathe powerlifting, track their macros, are taking their creatine every day, they get 9 hours of sleep, and they're doing everything they possibly can to be the best possible powerlifter that they can. And I think these two personalities are very different, and I think it's important to determine what type of athlete you are, going back to what we said in 3 and 4, and then determining where your coach lies, because that is going to determine how compatible and how comfortable you guys are going to be working together. Because if you are not going to prioritize your powerlifting training and you just want someone to guide you along the way and be a part of the process as a source of programming and support, but this coach wants somebody who is going to put their absolute all into it, and along the way you're drinking on the weekends, you're not tracking your macros, you're not really following the program, like sometimes you go off the RPE, stuff like that, he's probably not going to be happy. And there is going to be a clash over this type of stuff when it happens. And if you know off the bat that a coach is not okay with this kind of behavior or personality, then you won't work with them. And it'll be that easy. You'll be able to say, okay, you're not the coach for me. That's totally fine. And you go find somebody else who falls into that category of wanting to work with a diverse group of lifters. And it is so important that there is a personality compatibility, right? When you're thinking about professional sports, as an athlete, you don't have an option of choosing your coach. And when you're working in a collective, an authoritarian figure usually yields more success in a team sport setting. But in an individual setting, you usually have to be a mixture of both. You need to be authoritarian at times, but you also need to be empathetic at times. And the fact is, in powerlifting, you choose your coach. So it's important that you guys feel comfortable communicating with each other and are compatible on a personality level. So make sure that you guys have the same values when it comes to the sport, have the same expectations of each other when it comes to communication, professionalism, whatever. And honestly, I think it even goes even further, because finding a coach who maybe has the same sense of humor as you, or just feels more comfortable communicating with somebody like you, I think it lends itself to a way better coach-client relationship that extends into your performance as a lifter. I think that when there is that chemistry between a coach and an athlete, it yields better progress on the platform than if there's this wall up where it's just purely professional. You guys are like stoic, very just dry back and forth. I think that there tends to be way more progress observed, especially in the long term, when a coach is personally invested in the lifter as a person on top of being invested in them as an athlete. All right, guys, so moving on to some of the more nuanced factors to consider when looking to hire a coach. Coming in at number 6 is, does this coach share knowledge or information on any social media platform. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they are making weekly YouTube videos or even have a YouTube channel at that. It just means, are they sharing information? And I think it goes a lot deeper than just being generous. I think that it actually says something about how they are as a learner and what they want to see out of themselves from a growth perspective. Because I think that if you are willing to share information, it doesn't just mean that you're generous, but it also means that you're confident in your methods and you're confident enough to put them out there. But it also means that you are open to the idea that you are possibly wrong. Because when you put information out there that you believe to be right, and you are willing to accept criticism, you are given the opportunity to defend yourself, to be challenged, and ultimately, if you are wrong, you're given the opportunity to grow. So I think that if you are a coach who doesn't share information, you probably fall into one of a few categories. Either you're just selfish and want to hold information tight to the vest, which some may perceive as a pro, some may perceive as a con. I personally perceive it as a con, but I think on a deeper level, it could mean one of two other things, which I think are just more important to an athlete, which are that you may not be confident in your methods, or you may just be really complacent and want to surround yourself in an echo chamber and don't necessarily want to be challenged. You don't necessarily want to have the dialogue, and you don't necessarily want to have to defend yourself because maybe you can't defend yourself. And that just, to me, seems like somebody who is limited mentally from like a growth mindset. Like they don't genuinely want to go further. They think that they know everything that there is to know. And I don't think that that's a healthy mindset to have as a coach. So I think that this is something that you're probably going to be doing more of your own research on rather than asking them. But I think this is incredibly, incredibly valuable to consider when looking for a coach. So moving on to number 7, which I think is similar to number 6, is finding out who this coach associates with professionally, who they respect in the coaching game and share information with, and just where they get information from in general. I think that it's a good litmus test to find out what kind of resources this coach uses to enrich their knowledge. It could be videos, it could be research, whatever it might be. It's good to at least know that a coach is trying to stay current to the best of their abilities. However, a lot of the information that is out there has already been well established, and chances are if you ask a sample of coaches, they're probably all going to have very similar answers as to where they learned what they know. And frankly, a lot of research that comes out isn't necessarily groundbreaking or tells us something we don't already know. So to take things a step further, we would like to know whether or not this coach is frequently discussing coaching, programming with other coaches that they respect. Because I think that if the buck stops with regards to considering and just thinking about powerlifting coaching with them just making your spreadsheet, I think that there's a good chance that this coach is not really as invested in powerlifting coaching as a passion as some other coaches might be. Because I think that coaches who are constantly talking with other coaches are receptive to learning. They're just super passionate about it and want to either just discuss it for the sake of it or discuss it to reach some sort of higher understanding. So I think it's really important to know that they are actually having these types of conversations and at the very least know who these people are. Because if you find that a coach is associating with these other coaches and then you go and say, oh, like, yeah, I follow that guy's stuff. It's actually really good. I think that guy's super smart. That is going to be a pretty good tell. Like, okay, this guy who I'm considering to be my coach, like, is cool with these other guys, and I respect their content. I respect what they put out. So I'm probably getting into a good situation here because this guy is clearly just tossing ideas back and forth with this other person. And I think that even on like a general broad scale, if you're talking with other coaches and high achievers in the sport, chances are you're sharing experiences or insights that may just span past the realm of powerlifting specific stuff, and you might just learn more on how to be a better coach in the sense of like dealing with people. And I think that that is incredibly valuable, and that is a piece of information you would obviously want to know. So I think to summarize, you just want to know who this person's associating with, who they share information with, and just like, are they hungry for more of it?
I'm hungry.
Number 8 is going to build on some of the stuff that we've talked about when it comes to growth mindset, and that is asking the coach How has his model changed over the years? If he looked back at what he was like when he first started, what he looked like a couple years ago, and what he looks like now, what would he have to say about the differences? And I think that the answer should be that there is a difference, and they should be able to tell you what those differences are. Because I think that if you are a coach who has not changed drastically since your birth into this sport, then you are probably not a good coach. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean that if you look back 5 years and say, wow, I totally would not be doing things this way, it doesn't mean that you were necessarily a bad coach back then. It just means that you have evolved your model closer and closer to what you believe to be the best for the sport and best for your athletes. Now, I'll give you guys a perfect example. Somebody that I talked about at the beginning of this video, Johnny Candido. He put out the 6-week program years ago. And I will still stand by the idea that that is probably one of the best generalized programs to run for a novice to intermediate level lifter. And Johnny clearly still believes it because he still has it up on his website. It is still accessible to the public. Now, Johnny's programming philosophy has changed immensely over the past several years. Johnny used to run really short blocks with variations, quick turnarounds, didn't do singles year round on the squat and bench press. Like, there is a lot that he does now that he didn't do back then. And I don't necessarily think that the 6-week is a bad program. I think it's a great program for a lot of people to run. I think that I had tons of excellent results with athletes and was a great coach 4 years ago. But there are a ton of things that I would not do now that I was doing 4 years ago from a programming standpoint. And I think that being able to say that, truthfully say that, is an incredible sign of growth as a coach. And if a coach can't answer that question for you in a meaningful way, it probably means that they have not been eager to learn or become a better coach over the years. And I think that training as a whole has changed. Like, the landscape of what is like considered the best way to do things for powerlifting has changed in like the mainstream opinion from 2015, 2016 to now. So if you didn't evolve with that, chances are you're not at the top. Like, you are not a household name as a coach. So find that information out. It's really important to know that a coach has actually taken the time to think about, like, how am I compared to when I started? So before we get into 9 and 10 to round out the video, I would like to make the disclaimer that number 9 is probably my most controversial opinion on things to consider when looking for a coach. And that is, does the coach still lift weights? And because we've transitioned from this bro science era of lifting into a more evidence-based era of lifting, not as many people as you would think still believe that this actually matters. And I couldn't agree less. I absolutely believe it's imperative, because I think it demonstrates that the coach still has a personal investment and genuine love for the sport. And I think that anybody who has a passion for something is going to do that job better than if they only have a professional attachment to it. And I think there's an additional level of investment you have in an athlete when you are personally invested in getting better at that craft yourself. And I think not enough people are willing to admit that when a coach becomes detached from the sport on a personal level, they get closer and closer to only doing it for professional reasons, which in my opinion lowers the quality of the work. I don't think enough people are willing to say that some coaches are only still doing it because they're good at it and because it makes them money. If you have a full roster of lifters, you're not going to just drop all of them and pivot into another career. You're going to continue working with these athletes. But the problem becomes that the longer you are removed from the sport, the more out of touch you are going to become. And I don't necessarily think that it's bad on the coach's side to still be working with these athletes. But if I'm an athlete looking for a coach, I want as many layers of investment in me as are possible. And that is certainly going to come from a coach who still loves the sport. And to go back to the concept of time playing a role in how out of touch somebody becomes, I think the longer you spend not lifting and not being personally invested in the sport, the more out of touch you become on a programming level. I think that you start to program things that in a vacuum might make sense and look good on paper, but in practicality, they might not be as effective as you thought. And the rate of these miscalculations will only get higher, I promise you, the longer you spend detached from the sport. And I honestly don't know how in good conscience a coach could program something that they themselves have not tried. Now, like Boris Shiko, for example, he's always used as like the poster boy of like the armchair coach who is still successful and is used as an example of, hey, you don't need to lift to still be a good coach. But let me ask you, do you guys know anybody notable who's coached by Boris Shiko? Because I don't. I really can't name any. And I don't know any high-level athletes today who still use his programming principles. I don't think that they still exist. And if this coach still lifts and takes lifting seriously, a couple signs to pay attention to are, do they coach themselves, and what kind of language do they use surrounding the concepts of progress and stagnation? Because let's face it, most coaches are not going to talk about stagnation or lack of progress with relation to their clients. They are always going to tell the triumphant story. Even in lifters who aren't making much progress, they're always going to say how they overcame something and made a ton of progress. But they'll usually be way more honest about themselves. And if you see that a coach is saying things like, most training sessions are going to suck, or progress doesn't really come that often, and most days you're just doing the work, and you can just see from following their Instagram feed that they just haven't made progress, and they coach themselves, that might be insight to you that what they are doing just doesn't really work, and that might be the case for their athletes. And I think most people are quick to write off this idea and will just say that, oh, like they're not progressing because they're focused on coaching. First of all, those things aren't mutually exclusive, but you can decide for yourself just by watching them as a figure on social media. Like if they still care about their lifting, they're in the gym every day, they're doing their workouts, and they're still not making progress, like it very well could be because their methods don't work. And I think if you pay attention to that language and pay attention to their progress, if it is true that they take lifting seriously and coach themselves, I think that that's going to be very valuable information for you. Because the fact of the matter is, like, nobody trains to not make progress. Like, all of us got into lifting to add more weight to the bar. Like, that is just a fact. So please keep that in mind.
What do we do now? Jiu-jitsu.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the 10th and final thing to consider when looking for a coach is how have they dealt with athletes' pain or injuries in the past, and how has their understanding of dealing with pain and injury grown over their time as a coach? Now, the questions you're going to want to ask are, have they dealt with athletes who have gotten injured? What was the nature of the injuries? And how did they go about fixing it? Did it work? In the event that they were unsuccessful, what did they learn from the process? How did they better equip themselves in the future to handle these things should they arise again? And in the event that it was outside of their realm of expertise, were they humble enough to say, I don't know? Do they have a network of professionals and resources to refer out so that these athletes can get back to 100% as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Now, it's my firm belief that as a powerlifting coach, you should have a plan in place if an athlete gets injured. Now, this plan can feature direct intervention, indirect intervention, or a mixture of both. Personally, I think there are too many resources out there that it would make you incomplete as a coach to not have some method of direct intervention should an athlete get hurt. I think that as a complete powerlifting coach, you should have a way to deal with an athlete pain or injury outside of just telling them to take time off. But it truly is a necessity to admit when you truly don't know something and have a network of people that you trust to be able to refer out so that your athletes can get better quickly. And I think that this is super valuable information for an athlete to find out off the bat that I think it's not spoken about enough. I think that athletes have the right to know that they are going to be in good hands, not just when training is going well, but when things go south. Because at some point in an athlete's career, he is going to deal with discomfort. And a coach, if they work with enough athletes, is going to have one or multiple athletes who deals with discomfort. And you're going to need a plan as a coach to deal with that. And as an athlete, you deserve to have a coach who has a plan to deal with that.
Bro, you need a foam roller? Bro, you need a foam roller? Foam roller, foam roller, foam roller.
That was a beast of a video to film, but let me tell you, that was probably one of the most rewarding videos that I have ever filmed. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I've been feeling particularly inspired lately to pump out as much original content as I possibly can. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments if there's anything you would like to see me discuss going forward, and I'll be happy to take it into consideration. I honestly think that this video is going to be incredibly valuable to those of you who are in the market for a coach, because a lot of people out there don't really know what to look for in a coach. Some people think the coach that has a few superstars is the right fit. Some people are just looking for the cheapest coach, and some people are just looking for a coach who is strong himself. And while I think on some level each of these things is important, depending on what your values are, there are so many things that we discussed today that are going to play a huge role in helping you find the best coach for you. So that's all I have for you guys today. Like I said, I really enjoyed making this. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, there are no bad days, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be very soon. Take care, guys.